thank you, Emily, for the introduction, and Aaron as well, and for the invitation to be with you all here today. It's great. I see a lot of familiar faces. I see some new faces, and the same with folks online as well. So I'm going to be talking to you about biochar, and as Emily said, I guess I'll introduce myself as well. Debbie Aller. I'm an extension associate at Cornell University, working with the New York Soil Health Initiative, and also program coordinator for that program, along with Joseph Ansili. But today, I'm so glad there's so many other people who are talking about soil health, and especially from a systems perspective, which is really nice. I'm going to be talking about another topic that I've been working on for nearly a decade now within research and extension areas, and that is biochar. So to start, how many people, let's say in the room, have heard of biochar? All right, a good amount. How many people have used biochar on their farm or know a farmer who has used biochar? Okay, a couple hands, which is nice to see, but a lot fewer. How many people might be willing to try biochar on their farm? Okay, more than that. Great, very good. I'm glad to hear that. And so hopefully today, I'll be able to convey some of the potential benefits around biochar, and for those who don't know much about it, what it is. And Aaron gave me now about 10 minutes to talk for a presentation. He asked me about 3 weeks ago to talk for an hour. So I've condensed a lot of information to a few slides. So over lunch or at the end of the day, if people have further questions, I'd be happy to speak with you more about it. But I am gonna go through some slides in particular fairly quickly today. All right, so to start, what is biochar? It's material that's been pyrolyzed. It's organic material, so it pretty much can be made from any organic waste material. And we're talking about sustainably sourced waste materials. We're not talking about cutting down trees or using material that would have another beneficial purpose. And so as it is made through pyrolysis, and pyrolysis differs from incineration. And biochar is one of the 3 co-products that comes out of the pyrolysis process, along with gases or syngases as they're called, which can go back to the produce electricity and be a part of the electrical grid, as well as liquids, which can be oils and tars, and those can be used for bioasphalt and other bio-based products. And then biochar, which can be used as a soil amendment, but it also has many different applications, over 100 different applications for biochar, but it's really that soil amendment benefits that I'm going to be talking about today. And for folks who have heard me speak about biochar recently, because I've been asked a number of times, my slides are fairly similar to that, so I apologize if it's repetitive. And so here's just a picture of what a raw material, a raw feedstock looks like a corn stover residue, and then a pyrolyzed corn stover residue. And so biochar looks like charcoal, but it is slightly different from a chemical perspective. And it's about a 50 to 90% carbon material. So it's very carbon rich, although this percentage varies depending on the feedstock and production conditions. And you can think of the properties and kind of the microporosity of biochars as kind of a sponge with different size and shape pores. And this then creates very favorable environment for microbes, for water and nutrients. And what really makes biochar different than other amendments like manure, compost, is its ability to resist degradation in the soil. It's a long-lasting, very stable form of organic matter once it's applied to the soil environment. But biochar is not new. It's a very historic and ancient practice. It really became popular from a modern perspective because of what are called the Terra Preta de Indio soils down in the Brazilian Amazon. And so these soils are very different than the soils we have here in New York and the Northeast and the US in general. These are oxisol soils, tropical soils that are very highly weathered, low fertility, low water holding capacity, and nutrient retention capacity. And basically over hundreds of thousands of years, indigenous practices of applying charred residues back onto the soil created very dark earths. That's what terra preta means. And these are soils that are very fertile and much more productive than the comparative oxisol soils right next to them. And these soils have been found really all over the world, in Australia, here in the US, in Europe as well. And it's these repeated applications of charred material, this stable organic material. And I'll have a couple examples of what I mean by that. And so what another big benefit of biochar contribution for climate mitigation and adaptation, its ability to be a sink of carbon in our soils and long-term storage capacity. So that's sequestration. And it has huge potential, I'm just putting these up on the slide there, to draw down carbon from our atmosphere. So that mitigation side of global warming, as well as adaptation for farms in terms of building resiliency of farming systems. And it also has significant potential for methane reduction, a huge issue within our dairy cropping systems, not just in the Northeast, but across the US. And this was some excellent work, literally just published a couple of weeks ago out of a group at UC Merced, talking about how biochar mixed with dairy manure compost can reduce methane emissions coming from dairy manure composted that has been amended with biochar by about 80%. So really great potential for utilizing biochar with our other organic amendments, which I'm going to talk about in the context of New York systems as well in a few more slides. So these are just a couple of graphs. I don't want to bore you with figures, but I think it's important to show this concept of the stability of biochar. So if you're using biochar or thinking about using biochar, it's important to realize once you apply it, it's going to be there forever. And so you want to make sure you're utilizing the right biochar and potentially the right amount, and not applying it to areas of your farm where it could potentially have negative or neutral impacts on your cropping systems. So this is just, I think I can pull that up. Just showing kind of the rate of carbon that remains over time for a highly stable material like biochar compared to uncharred organic materials like compost, woody residues, crop residues, manure, and things like that. And meaning that carbon's going to stay in the soil for long periods of time. This is just another very busy figures of that same concept. But really what I want to show here is that biochar properties and its stability over time really depends on the feedstock it's made from and how it's produced, the pyrolysis conditions that are utilized to produce that biochar. And if you ever look at a biochar test report, just like a manure report or compost report or soil test, there's something called the H to C ratio, your hydrogen to carbon ratio. So biochar, like I mentioned earlier, is largely carbon, but there are other nutrients in it to a much smaller extent, smaller amount, and it's that H to C ratio that is used as an indicator of biochar stability within the environment. So moving a little bit more to more of the practical side now, and less on just kind of a little background of biochar, is that biochar can be produced at many different scales, all different sizes, from really large integrated bioenergy systems where the pyrolysis system is targeting more of those gases and oils because they're economically more, have greater value than biochar, and that can be producing about 50 tons a day of biochar, all the way down to, one family producing biochar out of a kiln, and maybe producing 1 to 2 pounds of biochar during a cooking event. There are more and more farmers, because of the cost of biochar, which I'm going to mention in a few slides, that are producing biochar on farm. And there are numerous ways that this can be done. There are consulting services that can help with this as well. Biochar has also been really supported by the U.S. Forest Service because it has incredible potential for forest management and reducing the risks of wildfires, particularly in the western part of the U.S. And so this mobile pyrolysis units have been incredibly popular and advocated for by the U.S. Forest Service, just because they have really great potential to be moved around and can produce char where char is needed. So getting at what I mentioned before with biochar production is that because of the feedstocks and the way that biochar is made, it is diverse, and thus the impacts it has on the soil system differ. Sorry, this is blocking. And so we get these very interconnected, interrelated impacts of the soil, the crop, the biochar type, the environment itself, the soil type, and management impacts that will affect how biochar reacts in the soil and the impacts it's had. Also, biochars that are freshly produced versus aged, so weathered over time, the impacts will change over time. And so this variability and these differences in biochar types and biochar rates is one of the reasons for limited adoption, not just here in New York in the Northeast, but across the entire US. And I brought these vials of biochar here today if anyone wants to look at it more closely. So one of the ways to reduce this variability and complexity and lower the barriers to adoption is through biochar certifications or standards. This is very important when we think about marketing any product, is being able to give the end user some security about its safety and the impacts it's going to have in the environment. So having standards is very important within the industry and for products like this. So the IBI, which is the International Biochar Initiative, created a certification program for biochars, but this is a voluntary program. And not many producers are involved in this yet, although more and more are coming on board as a way to confirm the safety of the biochar for use within soil systems. Essentially a quality insurance program so that we know at the end of the day you're not having a product that could potentially cause harm. If we think about things like biosolids and PFAS issues, everyone's probably heard of that. We don't want that to be a barrier for adoption for farmers and others who are interested in biochar. So within the US, there's no certification set around biochar, but we're working on developing one. I do also sit on the board of directors for the US Biochar Initiative. So we are actively working on this, and we know it's an issue. So I will hopefully have more to share down the road about the development of that. Just like with any material, anything you apply to your farms, anything you're buying, is thinking about why are you using biochar? Why are you interested in it? What is the problem you're having on your field? Are you having compaction issues? Are you having nutrient management issues? Are you looking to build water retention within your soils? So if you're interested in using biochar, if you haven't used it yet, I always ask, why do you want to use it? Are you having organic matter issues? So from maybe the NRCS perspective, this could be your resource concern. What is the resource concern you're having on your farm or your field, and why you want to use it? So one of the top questions I always get is, where can I get it and how much does it cost? So to be completely honest with you all about it, availability is limited, especially at the farm scale right now. We don't have the amount needed to apply it for the farmers that are interested in using it and the amounts they would need within their fields. But this is changing. Availability is increasing as the market is growing, and there's more and more interest about it. More and more people are becoming aware of what biochar is and its potential. The availability is also significantly more limited on the East Coast and the Northeast than on the West Coast and the Midwest of the US. There are a lot fewer producers, and the producers that are making it are not making it at the scale needed for farms. So just something to be aware of if you're looking for it, and this is why a lot of farmers are making it themselves. And also cost is significantly higher than other amendments, especially things like manure. When there's excess in New York State, and farmers in other parts of the country are really wanting it. And so when we think on the farm scale, and in tons per acre, it's hundreds, maybe more than $1,000 per ton of biochar, with potential application rates ranging between 5 and 10 tons. Everyone can do the math, it's significantly more expensive. So we know cost is a barrier to adoption of biochar right now. As the markets grow, as the industry grows, more and more is produced. Can that price go down? Will that price go down? We've already seen over the last 5-10 years that price drop tremendously and continue to drop. But looking to the future, can it be more competitive in terms of the cost of compost and other amendments for farmers? One of the biggest expenses with the cost of biochar is around transportation. I know folks in the Northeast who are getting biochar from the Midwest and from California. If you're transporting biochar, there have been some analysis done, basically more than 100 miles around, give or take, you lose all the carbon benefits and the cost is just not there. So we're talking about an industry that is local and sourcing feedstocks or the material that's making the biochar locally and from sustainable materials. So these pictures I'm showing on the slide here are just kind of some examples of the different scales, looking at biochars, basically at home garden stores. That's how it was about 10 years ago, to these super sacks, you'll hear them called, which are more on the small farm scale. And then this picture on the right of massive, or let's say freight trucks moving biochar around to farms. So getting at the whole point here with soil health and healthy soils, that biochar does have significant benefits to the soil environment, and it can be a tool within any farmer's soil health management toolbox. As Kirsten mentioned as well, that soil health toolbox runs deep, and biochar can play a role within that. It has many of the similar benefits that any organic material would have, in terms of how increasing organic matter in your fields impacts water retention, nutrient retention, aggregate stability, and help capture excess nutrients from running off your fields. The list goes on, and I've tried to just summarize that in that little table there. And it also helps stabilize organic matter that's already in your fields and slow the rate of decomposition there. Aaron, you tell me what I need to
Keep going.
keep going.
As long as you need.
Okay. So this was this is just a summary image. I realize there's a lot going on here, lots of different colors and bar graphs here. But what I wanted to emphasize is that over the past 10 years, there have been over 20,000 publications done and studies done on biochar at this point. So within the academic world, we've gone from only having a meta-analysis around biochar to a systematic review of already more than 20 meta-analysis. So review of hundreds and hundreds, thousands of papers that have talked about the impacts of biochar on various agronomic parameters. And maybe for the folks in this room, because I know I couldn't see it in the back, some of these parameters on the left are crop yields, plant productivity, water use efficiency, plant available water, root length and biomass, microbial populations, greenhouse gas emissions, plant nutrients, and so these bars are essentially the overall average of all those studies, and to the right of this central line would be a positive impact, and to the left would be a reduction. And so really what I want to show here is across all these studies, the impacts, the average impact on crop yields is more than 10% potential positive impact. So I just want, yeah, like I said, this is a busy slide, but overall biochar has had a positive impact on numerous agronomic parameters. So I think it's important to mention that biochar, that applying more is not always better. And applying significant amounts all at once could potentially cause nitrogen mobilization within the soil. And so it's possible to think about more frequent, smaller applications of biochar compared to larger single applications. And this can also be more favorable from the economic standpoint. So I'm just kind of summarizing general field application rates to think about. Obviously, in this room, we're representing different cropping systems. How biochar, or the rate biochar is going to be applied in any given cropping system, any different fields, is going to vary.
How do you apply it?
Getting there. I'm getting there. Yeah, I'm going to show you some pictures, you'll say. So there's also evidence in all those studies that have come out, not all of them, but some, that these large application rates can be detrimental. So there's essentially a threshold, but these are significantly high non-economical application rates of biochar. We're talking about 30, 40 tons per acre, and no farmer would ever do that. And I'd never recommend doing that. What I really want to emphasize is this idea that biochar must be inoculated or charged before application. And I put that in bold on this slide and emphasizing that because biochar itself, as I mentioned, it's significantly carbon. So it is essentially the carrier for nutrients. Itself is a relatively inert, stable material. So it creates that backbone to hold on to nutrients. So it needs to be mixed with manure, compost, nutrients to really have the beneficial impact on yields. The initial work that had been done was, applying freshly made biochars to the soil, and some of the negative impacts on yield were seen because the biochar was tying up the nutrients into that soil. So that biochar needs to be the sponge for the nutrients. And so this is just expanding a little bit on that point of what I mean by inoculation and how charging biochars has a much greater impact or positive impact on yield compared to biochars that are not inoculated and compared to just fertilizers alone. And so there's more research and there's effort going on right now around biochar-based fertilizers. And these are also more economical in the sense that you can use a smaller amount of biochar and have it, maybe mix it 10% by volume with whatever your manure or compost. And there's been research going on for quite some time now around designer biochars. So basically producing biochars that have certain properties that then can have be more targeted for nutrient retention or increasing water holding capacity. So specific targeted end uses. And this is just an example from a farmer here in New York of what I mean by inoculating biochar and mixing it with some other nutrient amendment. So this is the manure-based compost. I think it's actually largely horse manure and not dairy manure. But that pile of manure, and basically biochar that's ready to get mixed into that compost pyre and get charged before it's applied to the field. There's a lot of research going on by Johannes Lehmann at Cornell and the use of manure-based or creation of manure-based biochars right here in New York, because we have so much excess dairy, poultry, and other manures that can be used to make biochar. And because of the starting nutrient value of these materials, they already have more nutrients within those biochars than a biochar that's produced from like a woody biomass or a crop residue. And there's also all these other kind of co-benefits from using manure as a feedstock to make biochar. Listed some of those there, but one critical issue here, as I'm sure everyone can expect, is getting the moisture out of any manure. So separating the liquids from the solids there. I want to just highlight probably some of the reasons that you all have thought about of why farmers haven't really adopted biochar use. And so here are just some summaries of a study that was done by a University of Albany master's student published earlier this year that interviewed some farmers in New York State about why they haven't adopted or more haven't adopted biochar use. And then in some other work, why biochar hasn't been adopted. So cost has definitely been a big one. Availability, as I mentioned, there's more research that needs to be done, even though a lot has been done over the last decade. The need for technical assistance, need for NRCS folks, soil and water folks, and others to know what biochar is, to know the practical uses of it. And I hope someone like myself can assist folks with that. And the need for decision support tools. And I'm about to get to a couple of these points in my next few slides. These are just a couple of pictures from farms here in New York State that are using biochar, and it's really still being used by more high value specialty crops, largely because of its cost and limited availability. But within perennial cropping systems, vegetables, and urban farming. Something that is new, that is changing, and I know there are both NRCS folks on this call or online as well in the room here, but what I'm really excited about, and a lot of other soil folks are, and people in the biochar space, is the new financial assistance that's available for biochar. So this is one way to help try and lower the economic barriers around biochar, so farmers will increase the adoption. This is CPS 336. It was interim 808 before, so you might see 808 or 336. I think there's still things being worked out there, but basically identifying a resource concern on your farm and improving soil carbon. So it's a general soil carbon amendment, but biochar is one technology that does fall under this practice. So if you are interested in applying biochar or getting biochar for your farm, I think you should speak with your local NRCS office about this potential financial assistance opportunity. There was yesterday and today meant to be a webinar on this specific code, this standard. Unfortunately, it was postponed until January or February next year, but there are some webinars up online. And if we hand out these slides to everyone after, you can access this link. So just if you are interested in this, the USDI and Brandon Smith, who was previously with the NRCS, but now an independent, they're putting this webinar on. So if you are interested, you can look out for that. So now getting to your question about field application, how is it applied? How is it used? There are many different ways it can be applied. It really depends on your cropping system. So one that might be of interest to field crop farmers here: corn, Soy haylands broadcasting with some type of incorporation. Obviously, Kirsten and Tom, and as a soil scientist, no-till and reduced tillage is huge. I know there's a lot of no-till farmers here in the room, but with biochar, I strongly recommend it be incorporated into your soil somehow. It's a very lightweight material. It will fly away. It will wash off your field if it's not somehow integrated into the field. So from a no-till perspective, need to think about how your current management practices could utilize a tool like this. I will mention that some other work that we're looking at Cornell and within the soil health group is this idea of strategic tillage. I know Don's gonna ask me about that. But this idea that could a very occasional tillage, we're not talking about mobile or plowing annually, but an occasional tillage, could that help improve yields, aeration, allow for incorporation of some more organic matter into the soil? Are there opportunities for it? As he gets a phone call, good timing, I can get out of this question. So basically broadcast, this was doing some field research on a smaller scale, but basically broadcast with incorporation. There are other folks who are using it in different ways, maybe with equipment everyone here has already, but manure spreaders, it basically mixed in with liquid manure and spread over fields, that's possible. Some other work I've seen with anyone using dry fertilizer is actually incorporating biochar with that fertilizer in a no-till drill and drilling it into the field. So just some ways that it has been used and farmers are using it. So now getting at, sorry, I'm going way over my time, but I really want to talk about where to apply biochar, and this will get at also a new NRCS tool that's available. So why am I showing you the Central Valley of California, a very different environment than here in New York? But I'm showing this out because of some research that was done a number of years ago. Basically, it was titled, "Where should we apply biochar?" And it connected soil properties with biochar properties, and knowing that if we have poor soil quality, we're likely to have a greater positive impact on yield from biochar applications. So biochar itself, you can think of it like an agricultural lime. They're typically more basic, and so they raise the pH. So they'll help neutralize soil. So think about it like a liming agent. So where we see lower pH soils, where biochar is implied, we see improvements in that parameter. Lower organic matter, biochar is a carbon source. It will bring up soil organic matter levels, and can also link up with CEC. Biochar is an incredibly high surface area, and they help improve the cation exchange capacity of soils as well. And this figure on the right, basically in red, the potential for biochar to have a lower benefit on crop yields are in red, and potential for a higher benefit on crop yields are in green. So we can link up those lower pH, lower organic matter, lower CEC soil properties with a greater potential for biochar to have a positive impact when it's applied. And so this just summarizes that. And so when we think about it in the context of New York, this was just some mapping that I had produced with my colleague who had done that earlier study back in 2019, looking at New York State as a whole. And so this is big picture, but basically there's lots of potential in New York State for biochar to be used. And this is the same idea of that, where you see darker greens, the likelihood for biochar to have a benefit on crop yield is the higher. And what I've been really excited about, which has been great, is that the NRCS put into the wet soil survey this dynamic soil properties response to biochar. And this was building off some of that earlier research that had been done, but basically allowing farmers because I'm sure many of you have used web soil survey, to look at the potential on your field where biochar is likely to have what they refer to as an excellent, good, fair, low, or unsuitable rating on your fields. Within this tool, it's assuming a corn stover plus manure biochar applied at just a general rate, and what's the overall likelihood for it to have benefit on the soil based on the soil properties. So right now, there's some limitations to this, but it's an excellent step to a decision support tool for farmers around using biochar. And so just to summarize what I've said here, biochar is a long-lasting carbon-rich soil amendment. It does have numerous benefits. I didn't highlight all of them here today. I was really trying to focus on some soil attributes, but it has potential for building climate resiliency for farms, being an adaptation and mitigation tool as well. Biochar applications are not necessarily for farmers to be applied to the entire field, your entire farm, but can be used strategically in thinking about where the more degraded and low performing areas of your farm or your fields that could benefit from a biochar application. So could you utilize the web soil survey tool and think about, okay, these fields have a lower pH, or if you know they have a lower pH, or I'm lacking organic matter, I'm having issues with infiltration. Are these the areas where I might think about playing around with some biochar? You know, when you start to think about those changing in tillage practices and you go to the back corner near the forest, so you don't want anyone to see, could you think about trying biochar there? Emphasizing inoculating or charging or blending, you might hear those terms used, for mixing biochar basically with some nutrient-rich material before application. The cost of biochar is still high, as I mentioned here, compared to other organic amendments, but this is changing and availability is increasing as well. So just something to keep on your radar as well. If you're not thinking about applying it or utilizing biochar today, the market's changing. It might be another option down the road. And then if you're interested and you qualify for financial assistance through the NRCS standard, another thing, be aware of it, talk with your NRCS office. We're hoping to provide, more support and education for NRCS, soil and water, CCE, and other technical service providers across the state about biochar, so they're more knowledgeable and can better support farmers as well. So thanks very much for listening. I'm way over time, so probably just if there are any questions online, I'd be happy to take those, or here as well. There's my email. Happy to give you my phone if you would like as well, if you have questions. And I'll be around the rest of the day if anyone wants to follow up with me after that. So thanks very much.
Okay, so it's a group effort to get us behind, not just Debbie. Any questions from the audience? We didn't have any that I saw online, but I'll go check. Go ahead.
So just want to make sure I fully understand the question. So that this, I'm not sharing it anymore. Sorry, I stopped sharing my screen. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the question was about the fact that where the potential for a positive benefit from biochar lines up well with where we have a lot of, let's say, food scraps waste, or that's where the production is happening as well. Thinking about a lot in Western New York, Central New York. And it's an excellent question. It's something I think about, and I know the industry is thinking about. We don't have the infrastructure yet. We don't have the facilities making it yet. There's also more from an economic standpoint. It doesn't make sense to make biochar. The financial side of the production doesn't make sense right now. It's more favorable. You get more money from having the pyrolysis process go towards the more oils into gases than the actual biochar end product. We just don't have the facilities that are making it yet. I know a handful or a couple in Western New York that are working on building pyrolysis facilities to make biochar. It's just not there yet. There's also in other parts of New York State, they're coming on board. There's also a lot around air permitting for these types of facilities too. So I think a lot of what you're saying also gets at this idea of a circular bionutrient economy of basically nutrients from in one area, let's say one that's a waste product, and somehow creating that waste product and putting it into a value added product that can then be applied back to our fields as well. So reusing those nutrients and not kind of exporting them off the farms or out of this area. So I think in the future we're going to see a change. We're just not there yet. But I think your question gets to a much larger kind of issue. Yeah, so the question was, what are let's say the major barriers to adoption? Is that right? I mean, it is available. No. It's an excellent question. It is the availability. I think a lot of excitement started up around biochar before we have the foundation. And I think, I should take off about 10 years ago as saying this is the silver bullet. And then it crashed because we didn't really have the science to back it up at that point. We now have the science and knowing its benefits and have much better knowledge of where to apply it, how to use it. But now we aren't producing it in great enough amounts for use on a large scale, and that's really what is needed. So you can get biochar, don't get it wrong, you can get it, you can make it, but it's going to have to come from somewhere else at this point, because in New York State, we don't have the facilities yet. But like I keep saying, it is changing. Places are coming on board that are producing biochar. Okay, any more questions? Thanks, everyone.